Mutiny is mounting now at the BBC after it's emerged that bosses knew of allegations of misconduct against Gregg Wallace dating back as far as 2012. It's a great talking point, this, isn't it?
It is a great talking point. I speak as a woman who's worked in all sorts of industries in TV, which weren't always particularly sympathetic, let's say, to women, and sometimes it did get a bit racy, especially in the world of sports. But I think there's a massive difference between the odd off-colour joke and actually being discriminatory against women or committing some sort of sexual offence. Let's see what Emma Kennedy said. She was the actress who won Celebrity MasterChef in 2012. She said that she thought she saw a camera assistant, a female camera assistant, bend over, and Gregg Wallace, she said, went for and put his hands near her bottom, but she said, I can't be sure that he touched her.
OK, so she can't be sure. She can't be sure. All right, well, whilst a former staff member has now claimed that Wallace made offensive Asian remarks on the set of MasterChef, where he apparently made a kung fu fighting noise. So
now, Gregg Wallace responded to them. What's a kung fu fighting noise?
I'm not going to do it because I'll end up like Wallace.
Everybody was... Maybe he was singing. Maybe he was just singing. Gregg Wallace responded to the mounting allegations on social media. Here's what he said.
In the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef.
Okay. No, he's a Wally to say middle-class women of a certain age.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Come on, Greg.
That's get your shovel out and just keep digging,
yeah.
Right? Don't say that. But there is a much more important point at play here, right, which is it a crime to be a bit obnoxious? Well...
Oh.
Well, no.
No.
But...
I mean, a lot of men I've worked with would be in prison if it was a crime to be obnoxious.
Exactly, but... is he just obnoxious, or is he, you know, some kind of sex pest? He's
a barrow boy, right, for me. And I think that's why he said middle-class women, because what he's saying is he doesn't see himself as that. He sees himself as a working-class boy. Maybe the jokes are a little bit grittier. That's why I think he said that. He's making out it's a class issue, not necessarily a gender issue. Should we look at the actual allegations? Because I think that's kind of important here. 2012, that was when that incident with the Emma Kennedy mentioned. In 2011, apparently, there were 2 occasions he used sexually suggestive language, whatever that is. 2017, he did make a joke that used the word rape, and it was a bit off... Well, it was definitely off-colour, but it was a joke. And apparently he undressed in front of colleagues during production and made some jokes about it. And there is an incident where they said he had no clothes on, but he had a sock on his willy. Yeah, look, let's be honest, who hasn't been there? But, but it's not a stag do. Maybe this is the thing. If you're on a stag do, maybe that's OK. If you're in the office place, that might not be OK. But I have a real problem that a man's whole life has been cancelled because of things that he said. By all accounts. Maybe more will come out. We don't know.
This is the thing, isn't it? No, this is the thing. And look, obviously, I, as a man, I don't necessarily feel qualified to say that these people shouldn't have been offended by what he did. I certainly have never run around an office in that state of undress, although I did do it to raise money for charity once. So I suppose, you know, maybe I'm not as innocent as I like to make out. But I thought it'd be interesting to find out what classifies as too far in the workplace. What gets you sacked these days? You know, can an allegation from someone who's got no evidence to back it up, so it's a kind of he said, she said thing, which is quite difficult to say as it turns out, can that end up getting you sacked? Well, HR expert and employment lawyer Amanda Lennon joins us now. Bev, I think I'll let you take this one away. What do you want to
Morning, Amanda. Well, I guess that's a simple question, isn't it? Where is the line? Because this is a man now who's cancelled, lost his job. He'll suffer all sorts of social... being outcast from society largely now because of this. Does it sound to you like he's crossed the line?
Yes, I'm afraid it does. I mean, sexual harassment is any unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. And since the end of October, employers have had an enhanced duty to take positive, proactive steps in the workplace to prevent sexual harassment. So the BBC is under a duty of care, not to say it wasn't before October, but that is now enhanced. So I think, unfortunately for Gregg Wallace, that really there's no excuse for the comments that we're seeing coming through, if indeed he did make them. I think, in fairness to Greg, the BBC does have to investigate these comments in full. They do have to look at what the evidence is and make they're substantiated before they can take action against him.
So the BBC have to investigate jokes from 10 years ago that might have referenced sex. Are you actually joking, Amanda? Does the BBC, should it be paying taxpayers' money on that?
Well, the BBC is an employer, so it has a duty as an employer to investigate those allegations. It doesn't really matter how far back they went, because you can't just dismiss allegations based on the fact that they took place 10 or more years ago, when, if you think about it from the perspective of the person who raised the allegations, they could have felt uncomfortable raising them at the time. So employment law requires the BBC as an employer to do that full investigation first.
But there were some complaints. Asma Mia, who's now a radio DJ, she emailed to say that she thought something that he'd said was off colour. The BBC probably did look into it and they concluded nothing to see here. So why has that now changed?
Well, it depends on the nature of the remarks and the context in which they're made. So the BBC will be looking at each of these on its own merits, and some may be more serious than others. But it is possible that if the remarks that we're hearing in the news are true, Gregg Wallace could be found to have breached the BBC policies on anti-bullying, anti-harassment, and now anti-sexual harassment. So he could face the consequences for that.
Where's the burden of proof here? So if somebody comes forward and alleges something, whether that be racism or sexism or harassment or whatever, and they haven't got cast iron proof for this, it's not in writing or it's not on video, OK, where is the burden of proof here on Gregg Wallace to prove he hasn't done those things, or is it on the person to say that he did do those things?
Well, as an employer, the BBC has to conduct a reasonable investigation and come to an outcome that a reasonable employer would make. And so quite often you do have this scenario of he said, she said, and whoever's investigating that matter will have to consider whose witness evidence they believe on balance, and who's got the stronger case before making a decision.
Amanda, do you not share my frustration as a woman that whilst we're talking about a joke someone might have said 10 years ago, women don't have equal pay in the workplace still. Women are still doing the vast majority of domestic care at home whilst also going to work as well. Those real issues that affect women's lives get overshadowed by this nonsense.
I think it's dangerous to dismiss it as nonsense. I myself have been in workplaces where this sort of remark has been made, and fundamentally the duty of care lies on the BBC. They have to take this seriously in the interests of all concerned. They may well do the investigation and decide it's nonsense, but they can't make that judgment until they've been through the evidence, heard from both sides and made their decision. And that's just a matter of law.
So what should men in the workplace do when they want to make a joke? Because let's face it, I don't want to live in a world where people aren't laughing in the workplace. And a lot of the time, some of that joking might be of a slightly off-colour nature. It might mention sex. It might mention body parts, because human beings find that stuff funny. Should we be in a workplace where nobody says anything like that?
Well, I think times have changed. If I think back to when I started my career, those sort of jokes were much more prevalent than they are now. People have to be very careful because of the enhanced rights that employees have now in this arena.
Could I just ask you, Amanda, how often do you see this the other way around? Because, I've seen and heard plenty of women make incredibly off-colour remarks, sexual remarks, and I
might hear a few more between now and midday. Is that with me?
Right, OK. but you tend to see these high-profile cases where it does almost always seem to be the bloke who's been called out for sexual harassment. And I'm not trying to diminish people who have genuinely committed sexual harassment or anything like that at all. But what I am saying is you very rarely seem to see it the other way round. And if the kind of thing that Gregg Wallace is accused of doing, I've seen women do that in the workplace, not this workplace, we'll point out. I've seen women do that. You don't seem to end up in court over it.
I think you're right. And in my experience throughout my career, there have been women who've made equally inappropriate remarks towards men, and that hasn't been dealt with. That's not to say that that's right. I don't think that's right at all. But I think in my experience of hearing these types of investigations and advising on them, it is generally the man who, unfortunately, is accused of making the allegations. And that's just in terms of the investigations I've dealt with. But I would agree with you from my personal experience.
OK, all right, thank you. Fascinating, Amanda. Thank you so much. Employment lawyer Amanda Lennon joins us there. This idea of sexual harassment, though, like if somebody's pestering you in the workplace to go on dates with them, go to bed with them, that's harassment. If somebody bends over and someone goes, oh, nice bum, that's not... Is that sexual harassment? That's kind of what we're saying here.
I think the thing for me is the historical nature of some of... Not just with Gregg Wallace, but with a lot of different people. There is that idea, isn't there, that you can go through 10 or 15 years of your professional life with seemingly unblemished record, and then someone relays a joke you may or may not have made at, like, a Christmas party or at a wedding or something, you know, more than a decade ago, and you find yourself being cancelled for it. I find that worrying, and I think it should worry... I think it should worry everyone. That said, again, we don't know if there's more going to come out of Gregg Wallace. And look, there's plenty of people who are queuing up to say that this bloke is a bit obnoxious, right? So I don't think he's entirely blameless in everything, you know. But
it's not a crime to be obnoxious, and it's not a crime. If you watch some of the Carry On films now, which are just innuendo,
Little
innuendo.
You could have made Little Britain
even more recently, yeah.
The airport, or whatever it was that they did.